It was a voyage that was unforgettable in more ways than one.
And it was even made into a movie called Shackleton, starring Hollywood star Kenneth Branagh. In fact, back in 1914, British polar explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton led 27 men for almost 2 years through a harrowing fight for their lives.
And that's after the wreck of their Antarctic ship Endurance, which left them stranded on an ice floe some 2,000 kilometers from civilization.
Now, every man survived, and every man ascribed it to Shackleton's superb leadership.
And today, the lessons learned from that mission, described to be the worst journey in the world, are passed on to corporate and business leaders to give them just a little bit of edge to weather the turbulence in the current economic climate.
One man who spreads that mission is our next guest, Richard Coles, a leadership training consultant who joins us this morning. Good morning, Richard. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Stephen.
All right, so Sir Ernest Shackleton has been described as the greatest leader that ever came on earth, bar none. And you've been very inspired by him. Why so?
Why so? Good question. I was in Singapore over 10 years ago, training for an airline I worked for in Dubai. And as you do, I went to Orchard Road to get a book for the long journey back. And I went to the leadership section, and this book just is almost, I can see it now, as one of the first books that hit me. That's it, yeah, Shackleton's Way. Yeah. By Margot Morales. And I got in touch with Margot after I got back to Dubai. I read half of it on the plane. And I said, I'm going to turn this into a leadership model. And it's a great adventure story. At the same time, it had some great leadership lessons, and I was leadership skills training manager at the time. So it was a natural for me. So it all started here, actually, over 11 years ago.
I mean, so give us a rough idea for people who are unfamiliar with this trip. So basically, these guys got shipwrecked. They had to survive for 2 years in some ice-cold place.
Minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, it was terrible conditions. They were chafed to the bone, frostbitten, continually cold and wet. You can't imagine it. In a hotel environment where I may do this as a seminar, and remember, I took an ice story to the desert. You know, I was in Dubai. It was very hard for them to relate to it. I said, put your hand in this bucket, this ice bucket, and feel the cold. That's what these guys felt for over almost 2 years. Bitterly cold, winds, blizzards, and despite all that, of course they had to survive, dwindling supplies. There were no communication channels, obviously. There was no email or fax or anything, or telephone. Nobody knew where they were for 18 months.
Right.
So give us some examples of how he inspired his men and kept them alive.
Yeah.
Right. Well, first of all, he instilled confidence in them. He was an internal optimist. He was a man of sense of humor. I remember one scene from the film, but indeed this did happen. One of the guys wanted to walk home. I mean, he had lost it, actually. And he said, you stay here with me. I will get you home. I will get you home alive. And he said it with that conviction. But it was more than just words, it was deeds. Shackleton, by his example, proved to the men that indeed they were going to get home if they listened to him, if they worked with him as a team.
Okay, so is that the main message here? Leadership by example. I mean, is that Shackleton's way, so to speak?
It is part of Shackleton's way, amongst many leadership skills that he displayed in this incredible effort. His example was, for instance, to give you an example, when they had to scrub the deck before the ship actually sunk, the Endurance, he got down as well and scrubbed the deck. He was the first one out to do any hard work that had to be done. And there's a lot of things that had to be done. He kept his men very, very busy. He kept his men busy to take their minds off the perilous conditions that they were in.
Okay. So how did you take lessons that you learned from Shackleton and apply them to leaders today, leading business and corporations?
Well, obviously, the leaders today are not going to experience the physical exertion and difficulty of that sort of thing. But the human dimensions, the human response, the human reactions that Shackleton experienced, people experience today too in corporate world. It's a time of uncertainty. More is being asked of fewer. The demands are incredible. The pace of life is faster than it's ever been. And of course, change is the only constant. So leaders today have to be aware of that. They have to tap into the deeper emotions of their people and understand them. They have to be able to listen to them. You know, listening is the hardest part of communication, and he was great at it.
But the thing is that Shackleton, I was reading about him, and one of his greatest accomplishments was that he handpicked his crew, and he had a good eye for choosing the people that he could work with. But leaders today don't always have that choice. You know, you work with lots of people, you don't do the direct hiring. So how do you work around that?
Right, right. Yeah, he was a great recruiter. And again, there's all these sub-stories in the big story, and one is about his recruitment techniques. For instance, I'll give you an example. He needed a meteorologist. Of course, there's a lot of them, and he interviewed 5. This is about 1913, so a good few months before the expedition started in October 1914. And he decided, I need people who can do more than one thing. Okay, meteorologist is important, but he found one who can play the ukulele.
Right.
And he said, what we're going to need, we're going to have trying times, even if the whole thing progresses. He had no idea that they were going to be crushed. And so he chose the ukulele player.
Right.
And this little ukulele, I mean, that created a wonderful environment.
That's right. So it's these little touches. But I guess, you know, looking at that kind of leadership is very much a connected kind of leadership where he knew the people. He probably knew each of them by their first names.
Absolutely.
Very hard in this day and age.
Very hard in this day and age. Again, communication has been identified as the #1 contributing factor to the success of a leader today. Conversely, it can be, unfortunately, the #1 factor to your demise, to your fall as well. And we see these examples all the time. So you have to not only listen to them, but you also have to give them feedback. And today, leaders have to give feedback. Young people want to know, how am I doing? Right. Am I on track? Am I addressing this vision, mission, objective, and goals?
But it's very hard to find that balance between being your friend and yet being your boss. Because when it comes and I have to tell you to do something the other way and you don't like it because as your friend, you feel it's not my place. But as your boss, so that line becomes a bit blurred.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why some companies, some bosses say, no, I want to keep it totally professional. We are just colleagues. That's it. That's
sure. This is very much cultural as well. You hit on a very interesting point, and Gerrit Hofstede talked about the power distance between the employee and the management. And in some cultures, it's very large, and others, it's very narrow, and you're on first-name basis. I lived in 8 countries, and a few of the countries I lived in, it was first-name basis. But you know, when it was time for work, it was time for work. And we knew that. And when it was a time to have a game of tennis or go out for a coffee or whatever, it was time for that. So, yeah, there's a fine line. I think it's up to the leader to decide how that's going to work. A lot of work today in corporations should be about teams, teamwork. A lot of recruitment and HR people tell me that they're recruiting people today who want to work in teams, who want to make a group contribution rather than individual.
Okay, so you know, you meet a lot of companies, a lot of leaders. What do you think is the one thing that's perhaps lacking in today's corporate leadership landscape?
I think one of the things, again, is communication, and it's giving feedback to the employee. Employees want to be involved. They want the work to be meaningful. Shackleton made his men feel meaningful, that they all were doing something towards the effort of getting home alive. Well, to translate that to today's world, the effort might be to reach a certain budget, a certain revenue target, to reach a certain execution of a strategy. And if you feel you're doing something towards that, you're making a contribution, no matter how small, then I think that you feel part of it.
Right. But you have to own the process. You have to feel like you belong and that you're playing a part, not that you're just a second fiddle and, you know.
well, again, I mean, if you communicate what the corporate strategy is clearly to everybody and repeat it over and over again, because sometimes it changes slightly, but people lose sight of the final goal. I think as a leader, you also have to celebrate the incremental goals towards the final one. Sometimes the final goal looks like an insurmountable climb up Mount Everest, but if you can have a series of manageable wins along the way.
Milestones along the way.
Milestones. Everybody has the impetus and the energy to keep going.
And then each little milestone.
Yeah.
And don't forget to reward them at the end, because sometimes you feel forgotten when it's all done. You know?
Well, exactly. The celebration should be all of us together, and if we didn't make it, we have to share the blame as well.
That's true.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Our guest this morning, Richard Coles, a leadership training consultant whose work is fashioned after the lessons learned from Sir Ernest Shackleton's Antarctic expedition in 1914, all described here in this book. You can actually pick it up. I'm sure it'll be a very interesting tale of how they survive, and especially the movie. Now I'm curious. I might want to check it out.
Me too. And for more about his training sessions, you can log on to his website. It's www.colestraining.com.